The stagecoach left Eleanor Vance in a road already vanishing under snow. The driver tossed down her trunk, crossed himself, and snapped the reins before she could ask where the house stood. Wheels groaned once. Then the storm swallowed horse coach and lamp. Ellie stood alone with snow needling the skin above her collar. Across the road, a man waited beside a black mare. He was taller than she had expected, broad through the chest, hat brim low. A pale scar ran from the corner of his right eye toward his temple, white as old bone against weather-dark skin. "Mrs. Thorne," he asked. His voice was rough but quiet. "Not yet." His eyes moved to the trunk, then to the road behind her. "Ain't a preacher for 40 miles. I was told the papers were enough." "They are." That was all. Silas Thorne lifted her trunk as if it held blankets instead of every scrap of life she had stolen back from Boston. He tied it behind the saddle and offered her the reins to a dun gelding. Ellie did not move. "You ride," he asked. "I can stay on. Storm won't care." He turned away. The trail climbed through black pines bent under ice. Wind tore over the ridge and drove loose snow into her face until her lashes froze together. Silas never looked back yet. Each time her gelding stumbled, his mare slowed. Near dusk, a cabin rose from the white like a burnt stump. No fence lantern, no dog, no smoke she could see until they reached the porch where the chimney breathed one thin gray line into the dark. Inside, heat struck her cheeks hard enough to sting. Pine logs cracked in the hearth. An oil lamp burned low on the table. The room smelled of wet wool wood smoke and venison stew thick with onion. Silas set her trunk near the wall. "Bolt's there," he said, nodding to the door. "You can use it." Against whom his gaze stopped on her face. "Whoever you came here fearing." Her fingers tightened around the wet gloves in her lap. He ladled stew into 2 bowls and sat across from her. No blessing. No questions. Only the scrape of spoons and the wind worrying the roof seams. On the mantel stood a cracked photograph of a younger Silas beside an older man. Both held survey stakes. Behind them rose the same snow-choked ridge. Ellie looked away before he caught her. "You sleep in the room," he said. "I'll take the chair. This is your house. Now it's half yours." The words landed heavier than kindness. After supper, he spread a blanket over the chair and turned his back while she carried her trunk into the small bedroom. No lock. One narrow window. A washstand. A bed made with clean sheets that smelled faintly of lye soap. She should have slept. Instead, sometime after midnight, a dull knocking rose beneath the floor. 3 knocks. Then silence. Ellie lit the lamp and followed the sound to a trapdoor behind the pantry. Cold air breathed through the seams. She lifted it. Stone steps dropped into darkness. The cellar smelled of damp earth rust and something sour beneath the mold. Shelves held jars, lamp oil sacks of grain. At the far wall sat an iron chest under a torn cavalry coat. The knocking came again. Not from below. A loose shutter outside. Ellie knelt before the chest. Its latch had no lock. Inside lay rolled maps, survey chains, and a leather folio stiff with dried brown stains. She opened the first sheet. Geologic lines crossed the Bitterroot Valley in red ink. Wells, springs, mine shafts, arrows marking underground flow. Across the lower corner, pressed into the paper by a bloody hand, were 5 words. "Keep Caldwell from the water." Beneath it lay a yellowed pledge signed by Silas Thorne and another name. Ellie raised the lamp closer. The seal at the bottom belonged to the same Boston mining company whose records she had fled 3 weeks before. Behind her, a floorboard groaned. Silas stood at the top of the stairs. He looked at the paper in her hand, and his face went still. "You weren't supposed to find that alive." Silas did not come down the cellar stairs. He stood above Ellie with one hand braced against the doorframe, the lamplight cutting the scar beside his eye into a pale, hard line. She held the stained map between them. What happened here? His jaw shifted once. Put it back. You said I was not supposed to find it alive. I said what I said, and I heard it. The loose shutter struck the cabin wall again. Bang, bang, bang. Silas came down at last. Each step gave a low wooden groan. He took the pledge from beneath her fingers, rolled it tight, and returned it to the chest. Ellie did not move. The seal belongs to Harrow Mining and Survey, she said. I kept their federal plats in Boston. His hand stopped over the latch. You worked for them. I copied deeds, water rights, claims men swore had never existed. Silas shut the chest. Then you know what paper buys. I know what men hide in it. For the first time, he looked at her as if she were something more than a stranger, brought through snow by contract. Then the look vanished. Get upstairs. Silas now. The word filled the cellar. Ellie climbed past him. At the top, she heard the iron latch close behind her. At dawn, the storm had weakened to a dry hiss against the windows. Silas was gone. His chair stood empty beside the dead fire. His blanket had been folded square and left on the seat. Ellie pulled on her boots and followed a line of deep tracks toward the barn. Inside, warm animal breath clouded the air. Hay scratched her palms as she pushed through the stall gate. Silas knelt in the straw. A newborn foal lay against his chest, two small ribs sharp beneath wet hide. Its legs twitched without strength. Silas had opened his coat and wrapped the creature inside it, holding its head beneath his chin. A crock of hot water steamed near his knee. The barn smelled of blood pine tar and bitter medicine. Come on, he murmured. You took breath. Keep it. The great black mare stood over them, trembling. Ellie watched Silas rub the foal's chest with both hands. Those same hands could have crushed a man's throat. Now they moved no harder than falling ash. The foal coughed. Silas bent his head until his cheek touched its muzzle. That's it. Ellie stepped closer. He looked up and found her watching. Neither spoke. A crash split the morning. The outer gate slammed against its post. Horses entered the yard at a run. Silas rose with the foal still in his arms. Through the open barn doors came Mayor Harlan Caldwell, in a fur-collared coat, followed by Land Inspector Jonas Pike and Sheriff Rusk. 4 armed men rode behind them. Caldwell smiled without showing his teeth. Morning, Thorne. Silas placed the foal beside its dam. You got no business here. Pike unfolded a document. By order of the Territorial Court, Silas Thorne is summoned for examination of mental competence. The barn went quiet, but for the mare licking her colt. Ellie took the paper. Pike kept hold of one corner. You his keeper now, I am his wife. Caldwell's eyes moved over her coat, her boots, her face. Fresh from the east, I hear. Poor timing. Ellie pulled the summons free. The charge claimed Silas suffered violent spells, delusions, and unfit judgment over land and property. If upheld, a court guardian would control the ranch. Caldwell. The name was not written, but it sat behind every line. Silas reached for the rifle above the stall. Sheriff Rusk drew first. Leave it be. Silas wrapped his hand around the stock. The tendons in his neck stood out like rope. Ellie stepped between the rifle and the sheriff's revolver. Silas. His eyes did not leave Caldwell. Move. She held up the summons. In the lower margin, nearly hidden beneath the court stamp, sat a small black mark, 3 crossed survey picks inside a broken circle. Harrow Mining and Survey. The same mark she had seen on sealed files delivered after midnight. Ellie turned the page toward him. This did not begin in Bitterroot. Silas looked down. His grip loosened. Caldwell's smile died. Ellie met his stare. You brought Boston with you. Sheriff Rusk gave Silas one chance to walk out free of irons. Silas looked at Caldwell. Caldwell looked at the rifle. That settled it. Rusk locked the cuffs around Silas's wrists and led him through the yard while snow drifted down in slow white sheets. The foal cried from the barn. Silas stopped once, no more than half a breath, then kept walking. Ellie followed to the gate. "When is the hearing?" 3 days, Rusk said. Caldwell mounted his horse. "Plenty of time to pack, Mrs. Thorne." Silas turned so fast, the chain snapped tight between his hands. "Don't speak to her." Caldwell leaned low in the saddle. "There he is." The riders disappeared into the trees. Ellie stood until the sound of hooves died. Then the valley gave her nothing but wind and the thin, hungry cry of the colt. Inside the cabin, Silas's cup still sat beside the stove. She reached for it, stopped, and pulled open the cupboard instead. Ledgers filled the bottom shelf, feed accounts, tax notices, water measurements written every Sunday for 11 years. The figures changed after Caldwell's mine opened. Dead calves, Yellow Creek foam. 3 families gone before winter. At the back of one book, Silas had drawn the same underground channels shown on the blood-stained map. Beside each poisoned well, he had written a name. Ellie saddled the Dungelding. The first house belonged to the Mercer family. Mrs. Mercer opened the door with a rag tied over her mouth. Inside, 2 children lay beneath quilts while a kettle boiled pine needles over the stove. "Our well smells like pennies," the woman said. "Did Silas warn you?" "He brought clean water every week till Caldwell called him mad." At the Dugan camp, a logger showed Ellie a dead trout preserved in a jar. Its belly had split white. At the Hollis place, an old man spat into the snow. Thorne near beat Caldwell's foreman to death. "Why, caught him dumping mine wash into the North Ravine." "Did you testify?" The old man looked toward town. "My sons work Caldwell timber." By dusk, Ellie's skirt was stiff with ice. She returned to the cabin and opened the iron chest again. This time she read every page. Silas's father, Gideon Thorne, had surveyed the valley before the mine. His last letter described a deep limestone basin beneath the ranch fed by snowmelt from the western ridge. The only clean reserve left if the upper streams were fouled. The pledge lay beneath it. "I, Silas Thorne, swear before Almighty God to hold this spring for every living soul in Bitterroot, though they curse my name and take my blood for payment." A dark print crossed both signatures, not ink. Ellie pressed her thumb over Silas's mark. The cabin windows flashed orange. She lifted her head. Another flash came through the curtains, then another. Torchlight. Men moved beyond the fence. 5 on the east side, 4 near the barn. More shapes behind the pines. The smell reached her next. Kerosene. It seeped beneath the door and mixed with the pine smoke until the whole room smelled ready to burn. A bottle struck the porch and shattered. Flame crawled blue along the boards. A man called from the dark. "Bring out the chest, Mrs. Thorne, and you can walk away." Ellie dragged the iron box from the cellar and tied the maps beneath her coat. Her hands shook so hard she missed the knot twice. Outside, boots crushed snow from every side. She looked at Silas's empty chair. 3 days until court. The men at the door meant to leave her 3 minutes. The first flame reached the doorframe. Ellie dropped to her knees and drove the fireplace shovel beneath the nearest floorboard. The wood held. She struck again. A nail tore through her glove and opened the heel of her hand. Blood ran warm into her palm, then cooled at once in the cellar draft. Outside, a shoulder hit the door. Last chance. Ellie set both feet against the wall and pulled. The board split free. Beneath it lay a narrow hollow packed with oilcloth bundles. Gideon Thorne had hidden more than maps there. Federal survey notes, water tables, land orders bearing seals older than Bitterroot itself. She dragged them into the lamplight. A burning rag broke through the window. It struck the table and rolled spitting sparks across the ledgers. Ellie smothered it with Silas's blanket. Smoke thickened near the ceiling. She opened the Boston folio she had carried west beneath her dresses. Harrow's clerks had thought a woman's hands good enough to copy their records, but not a woman's mind sharp enough to read them. They had been wrong. She spread Gideon's map beside a federal planning sheet dated 50 years earlier. The same western ridge, the same limestone basin, the same spring. One line differed. On the old federal sheet, the watershed had been marked in red and set apart under an act protecting headwaters used by frontier settlements. No town officer could seize it. No private mine could foul it. Any claim touching the reserve belonged before a federal judge. Caldwell had no lawful hold over Silas's ranch. Never had. The door cracked down the middle. Ellie searched the margins. Her eyes burned from smoke. One page, then another. There, a round federal seal pressed deep into the paper, still red beneath 50 years of dust. She rolled the order around Gideon's map and pushed both inside her coat. The door burst inward. Cold air rushed through the room, driving smoke and sparks toward the rafters. A thick-necked man stepped across the broken boards with a torch in one hand and a revolver in the other. 3 men crowded behind him. "Chest," he said. Ellie stood beside the table. Her bleeding hand hung at her side. "You set fire to the only clean water in this valley." He grinned. "Ain't our water." "No. It belongs to every family you poisoned." His grin slipped. He raised the revolver. Ellie reached beneath the table and brought up Silas's shotgun. The hammer clicked back. Every man at the door stopped. The leader laughed once. "You ever fired that thing?" Ellie aimed past his shoulder and pulled the trigger. The blast struck the night like an axe through bone. Snow dropped from the porch roof. Horses screamed in the yard. The torch fell from the man's hand and died hissing in the drift. Ellie broke the gun, loaded the second shell, and stepped through the smoke. Her coat hem had caught fire. She stamped it out without looking down. Then she pulled the rolled papers free and threw them into the leader's chest. He caught them by instinct. Read the seal. He stared at it. "Can't." "One of you can." No man answered. Ellie moved the shotgun from one face to the next. "That land is a protected headwater reserve under federal order. Burn this house and you do not face Silas Thorne. You face the United States court." From beyond the fence came another sound. Hooves. Not one rider. Dozens. Mrs. Mercer appeared first, carrying an empty water bucket like a club. Behind her came loggers, mothers, old men, and boys from every poisoned well Ellie had visited. The leader looked around him. His men began backing toward their horses. Ellie kept the barrel steady. "Tell Caldwell, the madman's wife found the law." The torchman fled into the pines. Behind Ellie, the cabin roof gave a deep, breaking groan. And in town, Silas still had no notion that his wife was coming to court with enough paper to hang a mayor. The territorial court smelled of wet wool cigar smoke and polished mahogany. Silas sat at the defense table with iron around his wrists and one cheek purple from a night in Caldwell's jail. His coat was gone. His shirt collar hung open. Dried blood marked the corner of his mouth. Across the room, Mayor Caldwell spoke softly with Inspector Pike. Men filled every bench. Women stood along the walls. Half of Bitterroot had come to watch the butcher lose his land. Judge Bellamy adjusted his spectacles. "Mr. Thorne, do you understand these proceedings?" Silas looked at the empty chair beside him. "Yes." "Your counsel has not appeared." "Ain't got counsel." Caldwell rose. "Your Honor, the man's own words show his condition. He rejects aid, threatens officers, and keeps armed watch over land he believes carries some holy charge." Silas's cuff chain scraped the table. Judge Bellamy lifted one hand. "Sit down, Mr. Thorne." Silas sat. The judge reached for the petition. The rear doors opened. Cold air swept through the room and sent cigar smoke rolling toward the rafters. Ellie entered with a bandage around one hand, soot along her jaw, and a leather document case beneath her arm. Mrs. Mercer came behind her, then the Dugan logger, then the Hollis family, and 20 others carrying jars of clouded water. Silas stared at Ellie's burned coat hem. She took the empty chair beside him. "What happened? Your roof lost an argument." His eyes dropped to her bandaged hand. "Ellie, later." Judge Bellamy struck the gavel. "State your business." Eleanor Thorne, wife of the accused, former senior map archivist for Harrow Mining and Survey of Boston. Pike went pale. Caldwell stood too fast and struck his knee against the table. "She has no standing." Ellie laid the federal order before the judge. "I have the original watershed designation, a 50-year survey chain, 11 years of well readings, and the company mark tying Inspector Pike's petition to Harrow Mining." No one moved. Judge Bellamy examined the red seal. "Call the witness." Ellie took the stand. She did not speak of kindness. She did not ask mercy. She drew the valley. With charcoal she marked the western ridge, the mine shaft, the poisoned ravine and the limestone basin beneath Silas's ranch. Then she poured clean water through a box of layered sand and chalk. The water emerged clear. She tipped a spoonful of black mine wash into the upper side. Gray poison bled through every channel except the sealed lower basin. "That basin feeds the Thorn Spring," she said. "The last clean source in Bitterroot." Caldwell's lawyer rose. "A parlor trick." Ellie opened Gideon Thorne's survey. "Then explain why Mayor Caldwell bought every parcel above the contaminated wells." She placed 6 deeds on the rail. "Explain why Harrow Mining paid Inspector Pike $300 2 weeks before he declared Silas unfit." A bank draft followed. Pike stood. "I object." Judge Bellamy looked over his spectacles. "You may object from the sheriff's custody." Sheriff Rusk stepped behind him. The room broke into low voices. Ellie raised the blood-stained pledge. Silas Thorne did not guard this land because he had lost his reason. He guarded it because everyone else had sold theirs. Silas lowered his head. His shoulders moved once. Judge Bellamy turned toward him. "Mr. Thorne, the petition is denied. Your property remains yours. The court recommends federal charges against Mayor Caldwell, Inspector Pike, and all parties tied to the poisoning of this reserve." The iron cuffs opened. For one breath, the whole room stood still. Then Mrs. Mercer began to clap. One hand, slow. Another joined. Then another. The sound rose until the walls shook with it. Silas looked at Ellie as though no room stood between them. Caldwell's chair scraped backward. His right hand slipped inside his sleeve. Ellie saw the black mouth of the derringer before anyone else did. It pointed straight at her heart. Silas saw Caldwell's wrist turn. The room seemed to narrow around that small black gun. Ellie had time to draw one breath. Then Silas moved. The last iron chain still hung from one cuff. He tore his hand free hard enough to split the skin, crossed the space between them, and struck Ellie with his shoulder just as the derringer fired. The shot cracked beneath the rafters. Silas twisted. The ball cut through the flesh above his left shoulder and buried itself in the witness rail. He did not fall. Caldwell tried to fire again. Silas caught his gun hand, drove it against the table, and hit him once beneath the jaw. The mayor dropped like a sack of grain. Sheriff Rusk kicked the derringer away and rolled Caldwell onto his belly. Pike stood frozen beside the jury box. Silas turned toward Ellie. Blood darkened his shirt from shoulder to ribs. She pressed both hands over the wound. "You fool." His breath came rough against her forehead. "Couldn't let him take what was mine." Her hands stopped. Silas looked down at her as if the whole town had vanished. Not the ranch. The courtroom went silent again. Ellie seized the torn edge of his shirt and pulled it tight across the wound. You may speak after the doctor says you are not dying. Ain't dying. You are bleeding on a federal order. That brought the smallest break at the corner of his mouth. By sunset, Caldwell sat behind the bars he had meant for Silas. Pike occupied the next cell. Harrow's deeds, drafts, and survey marks were under guard. Silas lay in the doctor's back room while Ellie stitched the tear in his coat beside the stove. When he woke, his first words were, "House still standing, half. Barn standing." The colt mean enough to bite Mrs. Mercer. His eyes closed again. Good. 6 months later, the last snow left the western ridge. Water ran clear through the lower pasture, bright over stone. New grass pushed through the black earth around the cabin. The burned porch had been rebuilt with help from men who once crossed the road rather than meet Silas's eye. Mrs. Mercer filled 2 barrels each Monday. The Dugan children came for 3 more. No one called him butcher now. Silas still spoke little, but when wagons climbed toward the spring, he met them at the gate instead of watching from the trees. One evening, Ellie stood at the kitchen table cutting warm biscuits in half. Butter melted into their soft centers. Sunlight filled the room, catching dust above the stove and turning the old pine walls gold. The cabin smelled of bread, clean wool, and the lilacs Mrs. Hollis had planted beside the steps. Silas came in carrying a repaired water gauge. "You set that crooked," Ellie said. "It reads true. It leans. Ground leans." She looked at him. He set the gauge down. "Reckon I can fix it." "You reckon wisely." He came behind her and rested his hands at her waist. Months before, she would have stiffened beneath a man's touch. Now she leaned back until her shoulders found his chest. Outside, the young colt ran the fence with its tail raised, strong-legged and loud. Silas lowered his face into Ellie's hair. "The agreement says 1 year. She put the knife down. "So it does. Winter's near halfway back. I can count." His arms tightened. "I made 1 oath for this land. Kept it till it near killed me." Ellie turned in his hold. "And the second?" He looked at her with no shadow left in his face. "This land kept me breathing." His thumb brushed the scar across her palm. "But you gave me a life." Ellie rose on her toes and kissed him while the spring water ran